As mentioned, Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North. I love the tagline. Join the North because the South can cram it. So the North meets the West. I've been on your show before, Doug, here at Y Option. Now we get to, that's right, we get to unite. I know we'll unite this weekend in Indianapolis in person. Last time we were in person, we were in Indianapolis for media days. But here we sit. Did you take a big exhale like we did here at Y Option? We made it. We made it through round one, I guess you should say, of college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been an absolutely unbelievable regular season. The double bye, right, gives everybody 2 weeks off, but also makes it a 14-week regular season. But there have been so many games that have mattered, right? And it's what I think we thought the 12-team playoff would bring to college football. But just for instance, watching how, I mean, Ohio State, Michigan was a huge game, but how much that mattered to Penn State to get them in the Big Ten championship game. And then all the stuff in the Big 12 to have 4 games on the weekend that mattered for the Big 12 and who's going to get in that championship game, and have Texas A&M and Syracuse knocking Miami out of the ACC title game. It is, and I just think it's one of those, Yogi, right, where everybody cares a little bit more about all that stuff because everybody affects everybody much more. So for an Oregon fan, you could say, what do I care about Syracuse, Miami? But actually, if Miami gets in the playoff, if they beat Syracuse and get to the ACC title game, Miami might see Oregon in a quarterfinal. So that could really matter. So I think it just was, I love the connection of the sport and I love the opportunity. And I thought the regular season delivered, brother.
Amen. I think the postseason will as well. We're hoping out west that it's like Kenny Dillingham meets Dan Lanning somewhere along the line. Just why not? Why not? I mean, it's crazy with SMU and all the things that you just kind of referenced in terms of where the sport was a year ago, where it sits now. Before we get to the now in this week, I do want to talk about, because as you know, my first year worked for the Big Ten Network. It's been a blast. We had some big Ten games this weekend, and I love to hear it from your lens, where you reside. You reside near kind of the epicenter of football a week ago, right? That game, Michigan, Ohio State. I watched that game back 3 times, and I came away with it every time being like, it was fun, it was competitive, it was heightened, it was tense, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't great football by any stretch, at least for me. And then they had the melee at the end. I'm just kind of curious your takeaway from, you've been to a bunch of these, you've covered these for a long time. You're well regarded, obviously, in all those communities. Educate us on the West Coast, your takeaways from the game.
Yeah, I did think that's a good point you made. I thought when I came away from Ohio State, Oregon, I thought that was a high-level game. That was 2 teams that I thought made plays, right? And it comes down to Will Howard trying to get down a second late, and the things that Oregon went over the top. And then Ohio State, Michigan it wasn't that same kind of feel. The thing that I think has happened to Ohio State is they wind up playing that game on Michigan's terms. And they always show the graphic. It's, I think, 23 straight years now that the team that wins the rushing battle wins the Ohio State-Michigan game, except Michigan is built to run and Ohio State's built to throw. So then does that mean when you get to that game as Ohio State, should you try to say, okay, well, I mean, it's 23 straight years. You got to win the rushing battle to win this game. Or should you try to do it on your terms? Now, they did throw it a good amount. They threw it basically as more than they did all year, but throw it even more. Ohio State's advantages in that game. Will Johnson's not playing for Michigan. Give Jeremiah Smith 15 targets. And somehow when it mattered, Michigan was absent 2 of its 3 best players in Will Johnson and Colston Loveland. But Ohio State let Mason Graham win huge moments because Ohio State, their weakest part of the team is the interior of the offensive line. It's I don't know, you got a 3rd down run here. What do you want to do? Maybe run it Mason Graham. It's no, don't run it Mason Graham. What are you doing? So to miss 2 field goals for Ohio State, that's huge. To throw an interception that sets up a Michigan touchdown and throw another interception in the red zone, that's huge. But the talent disparity, this is why it was so different to me. I look back, Yogi, since 1951 when Woody Hayes took over at Ohio State, when both Ohio State and Michigan are in the top 10, it's basically a 50-50 game. When neither team is ranked, it's basically a 50-50 game. But since 1951, when Ohio State was in the top 10 and Michigan was not, Ohio State was 18-4 in the game.
Yeah.
And that
Makes
was the
sense.
circumstance this year. So sometimes people say throw out the record. It's a rivalry game. I'm like, don't throw out the records. The records show you when they're both good, it's even. When they're both not so good, it's even. But when Ohio State's really good and Michigan's not, Ohio State wins 90% of the time. That's what I thought this game was going to be. So
Yeah.
when it's not that, it's changed my opinion of things, because otherwise the last 3 Michigan wins, that's 2 great teams. Someone's got to win, someone's got to lose. This is obviously a Michigan team with a huge hole offensively that still found a way to win. So huge credit to Sharon Moore, but what a failure by Ohio State.
Interesting. Like I look at rivalry games and I always say, when it's, to your point, the disparagement, at least the record wise or ranking wise this year, for the team not ranked, you got to survive the first quarter. Like you just got to survive the onslaught, and then anything can happen at the end of a game.
Yep.
And I think it's all about belief as a game goes on. When I watched this one, it felt tight, and I get big games do. And look, I come at it from a different lens than where you sit. That's why I love this conversation. I know it is the biggest thing going. Team up north, we don't reference them. We think about it when we go to bed. We think about it when we wake up. Like I get rivalries in that regard. But I also come from the school of Pete Carroll, which has really trained me in the following ways. Year 1 at SC, we played Notre Dame, and we made it the biggest deal in the history of the world. We wrote about it in the Buy Option newsletter this weekend, and it would visit the Grotto and college football, like all the things. And the team didn't play well, and it was just a big deal. So my thing coming into this year, first year of the Big Ten Network, and I'm a huge, by the way, I'm a huge Ryan Day fan. Huge Chip Kelly fan. You might not find anybody who loves Chip Kelly more than I do, okay? As a human, as a coach, the whole 9 yards. I know him extremely well. To that point, I look at this Ohio State team, and maybe this game, and this is what it is, but I felt like there was just, it was such a different deal than any other game. And I get the history and all that, but within your walls, and that's what we did at SC, it was like every fan in LA thinks USC Notre Dame's a bigger rivalry than USC UCLA. Every player is like, nah, it's UCLA, man. Like that's the emotional week. Okay. Notre Dame is like just hit for history. So when I say that is, as I continue to watch it, I watched the TV copy, I watched the game copy twice, just the coach's copy. It felt tight. Yeah. It felt like it was a bigger deal. Like just watching the expression, and everybody's a reflection of the head coach, everybody's a reflection of the leaders on the team. They all come back for this game. To me, I just felt like this team played like every snap meant the game versus every snap meant the snap. And you and one of your colleagues was there. So I want to hear about that. And then also tell me about the wind, because everybody's criticizing they don't throw it. And I heard from both staffs how windy it was. So what was it like out there in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, it right. When people are always wondering, it's like, oh, it might snow. It's super cold. It's like all that stuff. The wind is what matters, right? The wind is what really does affect that. But Ohio State was like trying field goals in the wind. It didn't make them go for it on 4th down. So I do, there have been games in my career covering Ohio State where it's absolutely balls going sideways. Like you almost can't throw the ball. I don't think it was that to that extent, but I still think you have to emphasize the matchups that allow you to have the greatest advantage. And I do think you still got to find a way to get the ball even more to Emeka Buka and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. But the mental side of it, I thought there was such a disparity in the talent that the mental side wouldn't matter as much in this one, right? I do think when the talent's equal in a rivalry game, then it really is about emotion and that mental toughness and handling the rivalry. But that Ohio State allowed that to be the case, right? Just go play ball. Just go do your thing. But I do think, Yogi, it's one of those where Ohio State brought back so many guys who could have gone to the NFL. That's been the story of their whole season. But they also brought back guys who had never beaten Michigan. So that was a living thing for them. There's going to be such roster turnover now. I think it almost might be good for this Ohio State program to kind of wipe out the guys. Ryan Day talks about scars a lot in this rivalry. They're scarred up, man. They're covered in scars. So there's guys who are going to play next year for Ohio State who have been part of it, but haven't been a big part of it. And I think they need a refresh. Now, and I think you could talk about whether they need a refresh at head coach too. But I think that it was too much for them. It's too much for them. Because again, the last 3 years, I'm like, listen, man, Aiden Hutchinson, I don't know what you're going to do. JJ McCarthy ripping throws on 3rd down. Like there's real football stuff here. This was not the football stuff. Ohio State should have been able to do what it needed to do. And instead Michigan dictated on its terms. And then it's one of those, again, why does Michigan have a great kicker from the portal and Ohio State has a kicker that can't be reliable in that game? There's a little bit of roster building on the edges that makes you question some stuff. So I thought it was, I think for a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of Ohio State fans, for a lot of Ohio State fans, this was the line in the sand. And it's in the new world, Yogi, it really is a heart and head conversation. For the heart of Ohio State fans, the game has not been diminished. There are people who are sick. There are people who can't function. Ohio State fans can't function right now. Nobody is saying, well, we're still in the playoff, because it's your heart first. And then maybe in a couple days, I don't know how much this has to say about whether Ohio State can win the national title or not, because I think they might specifically have a Michigan problem. And now you get in the national title picture in the playoff. I don't know. Take your shot. But there are hearts broken in Columbus right now. So the fact that Ohio State's still in the playoff is not making anybody, from an Ohio State perspective, much happier about this.
Okay, one more on this, then we'll move on.
Yep.
I hear you, fans. Your hearts are broken. But I also watch the players post-game. Yeah. And I don't care, like, the players are getting, and I get it, players are getting paid. It should be a totally different conversation. A $20 million alleged roster, et cetera, for Ohio State. But when I watch those two individuals apologize to fans, and you could feel the weight of it on them.
Yes.
I hope, and I know you do this with Kings of the North, the foundation of Y Option is thoughtful dialogue. Like, and I know that's a crazy phrase, like, couple days after the heartbreaking loss to your rival that you haven't beaten in years. But God, just like stay out of players' DMs. Like, let these guys just operate to a degree. You said something that stood out to me, though. You said, like, I think your quote was something along the lines of, like, Ryan Day. Like, should he come back? Should he be that guy? I just saw their AD come out and say, like, of course I have his back. Look at the job he's done. What is he, 66-10 in his time there at Ohio State? For me on the West Coast, I think it's absurd to think about Ryan Day being let go. I could see him being like, do I want to be here? I understand that. Bruce Feldman wrote a great piece about that earlier this weekend. But where do you net on that? Like, is that a thing? Like, I know the John Cooper thing and away we go, but like, what's reality for you, somebody living in that region around the head coach of Ohio State?
I think this loss makes it a reality. I was where you were before. Like, what are we doing? Like, are you serious? We're going to have this conversation that, like, they've won so much. And then they lost to Michigan last year on the last drive of the game, and Michigan went undefeated and won the national title. Like, somehow that's, like, so unacceptable that you have to get a new coach. That seemed crazy to me. This was a Cooper loss. So when I said 18-4 going into this year, when Ohio State was ranked in the top 10 and Michigan was not, it was 1969, which was Bo Schembechler's first year, and 3 John Cooper losses in the mid-90s. So now you have an actual Cooper loss. How could you lose this game? And I think there are things that you could look at and say, I now question whether Ryan Day can get over the top in this game. And my whole thing, Yogi, in this modern world for Ohio State is there are 2 paths, and they don't really intersect, but they're equally important. One is the beat Michigan path, and one is the compete for a national title path. The compete for a national title path is still wide open. The Michigan loss doesn't affect that. But the Michigan path is on fire now. The Michigan path is a failure. So I think you have to be really good on the compete for the national title path, because they haven't reached any of their goals for 4 years. They haven't been to a Big Ten title game. They haven't beat Michigan. They haven't won a national title. So go take your shot. But if you have lost 4 straight to Michigan and this team came back, you added Will Howard, you added Caleb Downs, you added Quinshon Judkins, and you weren't that competitive for a national title, if you lose, if you kind of get blown out in the semis or you lose in the quarters, then it's like, well, where's the success? Where's the path of success? You're 0 for 2. If you win a national title, you're not going to fire a national title head coach. But this is really, like, I didn't like the natty or bust stuff before the season for Ohio State. I just think it's crazy. But now I think it might be natty or bust for whether Ryan Day is back. I really do, because what are you hanging on to? And the pressure, if you don't have a national title, the pressure of now we're doing this all again for 365 days. Can you beat Michigan? It might be untenable. But
Yeah.
also, I think we now have real questions about, can this guy win this game? When I didn't have those questions before. They're just losing to good Michigan teams. Sometimes you lose to a good team. This really kind of changed my mind.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well, a lot to unpack there. I think this on the playoff for Ohio State, like obviously they won't get a bye from the beginning of this expanded playoff, which is great.
Yep.
I feel like it's going to be so hard for anybody to go win consecutive games against elite teams. Like there's just so many layers to that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you can't go out in free agency midseason and get a center or get a left tackle. Like there, and that's just the difference between that and the NFL. So
Yep.
I'm just, it's going to be fascinating to follow. Obviously, everybody's going to be locked into you at Kings of the North. Make sure you check out everything Doug and his team are doing. Okay, so let's talk about the championship game.
Sure.
Oregon is the only team that I've seen all season in college football that I can count on, honestly.
Yes.
And it's not just because they have a 0 in terms of unblemished, but like I know who they are at every phase. Like I don't have a lot of questions about their O-line, their D-line, their receivers, their coaching staff. Like I feel like, and I've been around this team for over 20 years, so that makes sense for maybe from my lens. For you, do you agree with that? And then what do you think about their opponent? Because their opponent has finally kind of, they beat Ohio State in the past, right? They're the team that couldn't get over that hump, couldn't beat one of those two teams in Michigan and Ohio State, and couldn't get to the playoff. And now, like, they're in the playoff lock.
Yep.
And they might have a number 1 seed instead of hosting a game in Happy Valley.
Yeah. So I agree on Oregon, and I do. We've been reminding ourselves, and it's why we were so grateful that you came on our show, Yogi. Like, we just wanted to make sure that we talked about Oregon enough because they were just doing their thing. And I kind of compared it to sometimes you have like a 5-star recruit who commits 18 months early and just is locked into the program, and you kind of forget about him, while the guys who are going down to the wire with signing day coming up get a lot of attention. It's like, hey, by the way, there's a 5-star over here. Don't forget about him. Don't forget about Oregon. And we were also reminding ourselves, hey, if there was anything that you thought, man, do they kind of not, losing Tez Johnson for the time they did is gigantic. That guy is so important to what they do, and that Jordan Birch has been in and out of the lineup. And we're so focused, like Ohio State has these offensive line injuries. Well, so does Oregon. And to lose that, like, I just thought that the Wisconsin game is completely explainable by 8 straight weeks. Camp Randall is nuts, and they did find a way. But that was other than the Boise State game, which to me was a Heisman candidate on the other team, and B, like their offensive line wasn't figured out then. Handling business. And so, like, I don't, is it possible you can't sneak up on somebody as the only undefeated team in FBS and as the number 1 seed? But if you could, I feel like Oregon might be doing it, Yogi, because they've just been doing their thing. And it's not, we haven't forgotten about them. But I don't know that, like, Oregon's the team that Georgia and Texas and Tennessee are thinking about necessarily, when it absolutely should be the team that they are thinking about, because they're the most complete team on both sides of the ball. They steal possessions, they win on the margins, and they're explosive, and they have a veteran quarterback, and they have playmakers on defense. I mean, they have to be the favorite going into this. And in a year of ups and downs, when teams are losing to Kentucky and Arkansas and stuff like that, to not do that is even more impressive.
Okay, so let's talk about their opponent. I do want your thoughts because you got to help out our audience. I watched the end of the game against Maryland, Penn State. It's 4th and 12 with 4 seconds to go, and they throw the ball for a touchdown.
Yep.
What do I need? What am I missing about for these two head coaches who used to be assistants at Maryland together?
Yeah.
And then what do you think about just the team and the resurgence they've had since they lost to Ohio State at home?
So been super impressed, because often what has happened with Penn State in the past is they lose to Ohio State and it sets them off on a wrong path. Instead, they have responded. Now, it was a little bit of a weaker schedule, but they've asserted themselves. And so I'm impressed by that. The end of the game, I believe in keeping the pedal down, and I think that James Franklin is trying to make sure his team is confident, because I've been saying all year since this started, I thought the 12-team playoff was built for Penn State. I thought they were the number 1 example of a team that could thrive in this environment, because you no longer have to go through Ohio State. You can just do your own thing and have a chance anyway, and this shows it. Andy Kotelnicki has been a godsend for them. As an offensive coordinator, James Franklin wanted to be more explosive. That was their priority in the offseason with that hire. It has happened perfectly. What Ty Warren is doing, I think Ty Warren has a chance to get to New York. I think we have 2 Heisman locks for New York. Travis Hunter's going to win. Ashton Genty's going to get there. Cam Ward and Will Howard were in that race. They're not playing this weekend. I think Dylan Gabriel's going to New York. I think the 4th spot could be Ty Warren, the Penn State tight end, if he shows out against Oregon. But their creativity on offense, the 2 backs, Nick Singleton had a slump last year as a sophomore, has been great when he's been healthy as a junior. You throw in Katron Allen. They're not explosive on the outside, but they're so creative. They have their own offensive line injuries as well, but I think Andy Koltelnicki finds a way. And they were not creative in the Ohio State game. They got stoned at the goal line with some terrible play calls. I think they have learned from that. And James Franklin has a lot of stuff about he fails in big games. It's really against Ohio State and Michigan. It's in his house. It's in his neighborhood. So Oregon, that's out of his neighborhood. The playoff, that's out of his neighborhood. I'm not so sure that James Franklin has a big game problem. I think he has a Michigan and Ohio State problem. And he has a chance to go win some games against great teams who aren't those programs. I really like where Penn State's at. Their defense, I think, has gone from good to great over the course of the season. They added some SEC transfers at corner, and Abdul Carter's a problem. They like their linebackers. They've overcome a safety injury. I'm super excited for this game, Yogi, because I absolutely think Penn State can make some noise in the playoff.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I thought that Minnesota was the one that would get Penn State. I circled that as an upset.
That's the game they lose.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it was great, how they showed up, whether it was the fake punt, like just the little things that they did in that game, just really creative. Andy Koltelnicki, huge fan, got to spend some time with him in training camp. I love watching the rise from small school to big time.
Yes.
Same deal with Dan Lanning, same deal with Will Stein. You look at so many people that are having success in college football. Kurt Cignetti is clearly the poster human for that description. I'd add Cam Scatterbu to that list. So to everybody listening, and you're a voter, don't vote. You got your ballot on a Monday.
I know.
Of championship week. It should be changed.
Can you believe that? They send out hey, you can start. How could you cast a Heisman vote today?
I don't know. We've asked. It's a sensitive subject out west because Christian McCaffrey got completely screwed for the Heisman because there were 15% of Heisman voters that voted in advance of him going for 3-something in the Pac-12 championship game that year against USC. I think your point on James Franklin is well noted. I've watched him beat Utah in person, watched him beat Washington in the Fiesta Bowl in person, like big games. I think this is a really fun matchup. The difference to me, and I'll say this, 2 big takeaways from Big Ten play, me being in the league for the first time. One is teams just lean on you, right? It could be 0-0 after the first quarter, like Ohio State and Purdue or Northwestern or whatever it was, and then it's 49-7. They just limited possessions, they lean on you. But 2 is it's been average QB play and just okay at the skill positions. Tyler Warren is a monster. Right now, to me, he's in that consideration for top 3 Heisman vote as well. What do their receivers do? There's going to be a world where Tosh Lupoy and company, they're going to do what everybody tries to do, which is they're going to try to take away Ty Warren, obviously. And I think they got linebackers that can run with him, and Devin Jackson, Bryce Betcher and company, Jeffrey Bossa. These guys are their former safeties now playing linebacker. They've got depth in the back end that I think can glove some of these wide receivers. So I'm excited to see how Penn State runs the ball. Drew Aller, how big is Bo Probula in terms of the game plan and the packaging? Because both of these teams have a ton of window dressing, shifts, motion. I think they're top 2 in the Big Ten coming into this game in motion percentage. So it'll be fun. Michigan might be right in there, the top 3 as well. But overall, I love the matchup. So before we cut you loose, it's Monday. You got to pick. You can change it, but where do you net out?
Yeah, I mean, I would lean Oregon. It's really hard for me from this perspective, again, having really locked in on that Ohio State-Oregon game when Evan Stewart was such a game changer in that game. But Evan Stewart's had 4 awesome games and then kind of 8 games where he kind of hasn't done anything. But again, I give so much credit to Oregon for winning the way it has when they haven't always had Tez Johnson, when they haven't always had Jordan Burch. I do think there's great coaching in this game. But the lack of explosion on the outside still stands out for Penn State. And to your point, again, they got Jalen Kimber from Florida and AJ Harris from Georgia as SEC transfer corners this year. They've got to go in the portal in the offseason and try to do the same thing at receiver. I just think Oregon probably is too well-rounded, but then also more explosive, whereas Penn State's going to be creative, but they have a hole that Oregon doesn't have. So I probably have Oregon by 10 or 14 in a competitive game. But I'm excited. I'm excited to get in there. And I just like it, right, Yogi? It's kind of fun to see two teams play at a high level that haven't played yet. So Oregon, Ohio State would have been cool. We've also seen that. We still may see it again in the playoff. I'm excited because we haven't seen Penn State, Oregon yet.
Yeah, I think what's unique about Oregon for your viewers, if they forget, last year they lost a tight game to Washington. Then they played them again in the championship game. And all the talk was on how Oregon was going to win that game. I think they were favored in that game. And everyone's like, what? Like, UW beat them. What are we talking about? And Washington comes out, and the first half, they just dominated. They ran the ball well. They did a lot of different things, and they win the game. I think that loss and that experience, especially for the guys on defense and the offensive line, like we know Dylan Gabriel wasn't there, but the majority of that team was there for that experience. There's a handful of guys that are new additions to this team that are impactful players. Most of the guys were there. I think that bodes extremely well for them in this game. And I just keep going. Like, I think coaches speak to the team through the media. And Dan Lanning's masterful in terms of what he says and how he says it. Job's not done. Like, they're just not satisfied.
Yes.
Like, season's not over. And we've been around him too much and flying up right after this. We're like, they just stay operational. I love that. I really like that. James Franklin, very similarly, like we hear the whole 1-0 mindset, et cetera. So I think we'll get a classic game.
Yes.
I think what's been interesting for us out here is 4 new teams enter the Big Ten. Curious for you, I just referenced the things that I learned from my first year covering this league in depth. Well, how about you? Like, is there a surprising thing that impacted this league, or something maybe you didn't anticipate, or something you confirmed with 4 West Coast schools coming into the Midwest and East Coast?
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like the travel did matter.
Yeah.
Right. Like, when I do, like, that was, so I'll be very curious how much that dissipates over time. But I mean, especially like Washington was 2 different teams, home and road. Right. And like, very understandable, but like, this is just the reality here. So I'm curious how that goes. And then just a fascination with what USC is going to do and what it is going to be. Because again, and we talked about this in the preseason, like, thank goodness for Dan Lanning in Oregon, because initially it was like, okay, here come UCLA and USC. Like, USC is going to be one of these programs that's going to help lift the league. And that's just not where USC is right now. But Oregon absolutely is there. And so, again, from this Midwestern perspective of this, like, Oregon is like awesome. It's not like, oh no, Oregon came to beat these teams. It's like, welcome. Like, let's go. Let's play great games. Ohio State, Oregon was an awesome game. And then you're one of us now. So like, go kick some booty in the playoff, man. Like, go Ducks. So like, when will USC enter that conversation? It's just like fascinating to watch from out here. But just, and I'm sure you know this, Yogi, the idea we could have 5 conference champs this season who were not in their league last year. Oregon, Arizona State, Texas, SMU, and Army in the American. That's how much the sport has changed. But welcome to the Ducks, our Northern Kings and our Western Kings, who are making everything in the Big Ten better. And I know how hard it was for everybody out there, but I just hope Oregon fans understand how fired up we are to have you. And like, I'll tell you what, man, like, if we wind up in like a Oregon, Texas national title game, we are rallying all the energy in the North for Go Ducks if we get there. But we also could get Ohio State looks like an 8-9. We could get Oregon, Ohio State in a quarter also, which would be crazy, but super fun. So let's go.
Yeah, I know the committee won't do it, but I hope they don't pit conference teams against conference teams. Like just do whatever you can if you can manipulate it, just in case.
Totally in favor of manipulation.
Yeah,
totally in favor.
Totally. Why not? Why not?
Make cool games. Make cool games.
I love it. Doug Lesmerises. He is the guru when it comes to everything Big Ten, Kings of the North. I love how you've expanded all your coverage with your team, man. It's a must follow on social. Love listening to you guys on the flights to games and coming home. And thank you for the time. I know how busy you are. Can't wait to see you.
Of course.
Give you a big hug this coming weekend. Jim Thornby and I will be there from Y Option. The West meets the North, and the Midwest and the South can whatever.
Cram it.
There we go, folks. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Yogi.